Welcome to the Payroll Podcast, the show that explores the latest insights and innovations in the world of payroll. Hello and welcome back to the Payroll Podcast. My name is Nick Day. I'm CEO at JGA Recruitment Group, and we're specialist payroll recruiters operating in the UK, EMEA, and now the US as well. Now, remember, if you are a regular listener to this show, please do remember to share it with all of your colleagues and friends. Together, we're really trying to raise the profile of payroll globally. And if you haven't yet, please do click subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you can be really great, leave us a little bit of a review on whatever your favorite payroll podcast platform is. Now, today we're going to be talking about changing payroll providers. We know many payroll managers have to go through this process. We know it can be expensive. We know it can be time consuming. And we know there's a plethora of potential solutions in the market. So where do we go? Where do we start? Well, today we're going to be joined by Sabrina Castiglione, who is Chief Operating Officer at Pento. They're a payroll solution provider that combines automation with best-in-class support. And we're going to find out exactly how they deliver that during the course of today's show. What I will say is they are a solution that supports any worker type and any working pattern in the UK. And their aim is to make payroll smooth, compliant, error-free. And they do that by automating processes and streamlining those really repetitive manual tasks that we all want to get out of our workflows so we can focus on the strategic value that we know payroll professionals can bring. So without further ado, Sabrina, welcome to the Payroll Podcast. How are you feeling today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Super excited to talk about something that we know pretty much comes into every single payroll manager's agenda at some point or another. But before we jump into the key content, I'm going to ask you one question I ask all of my guests, which is this: what does the word payroll mean to you?
Well, honestly, when I hear the word payroll, the first thing I think of is pain. And I have run payroll myself. I continue to run it at Pento. My last company, we got up to about 300 people in the UK and the US when I left, and I ran payroll there. And the first thing I think of is pain. Like, running payroll can be a really painful process. A lot of manual tasks, a lot of chasing people, a lot of having to answer questions after the facts and make corrections, and also just having to plan your life around payroll deadlines, which when I think of the word payroll, the first thing that comes to mind is pain.
Okay, well, I imagine there's a lot of people listening to this probably nodding their heads going, yeah, that's definitely a word that can be used. We've got to balance and hold lots of plates in the air with compliance and data security and legislation changes, which happen at frenetic pace, talent challenges, which is something that we're obviously involved in. So with all those things going on, we've also got loads and loads of news and people stating what they should or shouldn't do. One is you need to automate, you need to reduce those manual tasks, payroll should be more strategic, and there's lots to consider. With all of that going on, with all that noise, as we would like to put it, how would you know as a payroll manager whether it's the right or the wrong time to start considering changing a payroll solution?
Yeah, it's a great question, because there's never a perfect time, right? There's never that quiet lull where you're like, oh, I've got nothing else to do, so I can go and change my payroll provider. That time never really comes. And what a lot of companies find is that the pain, it kind of creeps up on them. That old adage about, if you drop a frog in boiling water, it will jump out. If you put it in the cold water and boil it slowly, it will sit there and boil to death. Well, I think payroll pain increases like that slowly boiling water. As your business grows and matures and gets slightly more complex, payroll gets slightly more convoluted and complicated month on month. So the first thing is just for anyone being like, oh, it's not a perfect time. There's never a perfect time. But some of the key things that kind of prompt that thinking of, is this something that, take the hit and try and do it now. When payroll processes, have really kind of become a beast in and of themselves, like when you are, doing military precision level time and effort management just to get payroll done. When you have many stakeholders involved, if you find yourself spending half your time just chasing people and trying to get information, if you find that a lot of what you're doing is effectively data entry and copying things from one place to another. Other triggers are, has your business evolved? Have you, for example, started to take on a lot more flexible or variable workers, or moved to weekly payroll? Have you increased your benefits offering such that, there's a lot more kind of taxable complexity in there? Are you going multi-geography? So business change, payroll taking too long, the business kind of getting more complex, and also just what is the pace of change within your business? Are you starting to see that there's a lot of headcount change every month? And I think kind of the big one that I always say to people is, are you starting to have to plan your life around payroll? Have you hit that point where you've had to cancel doing something because you had to stick around and do payroll? Is payroll getting in the way of the business because the rigid structures and timelines and processes that you're having to put in place to work around the complexities of payroll, imposing burdens on other parts of the business as well that may actually be slowing the business down rather than accelerating it? I think when you hit that point where you're like, I need to get payroll out of the business's way and out of my personal life's way, that's definitely a point at which, you may have outgrown your current provider.
Amazing. Well, loads to absorb there, loads to think about. I like the boiling frog analogy, because actually, and very sadly, really, post-pandemic, I don't want to bring that word up too often, but we've seen some really skilled payroll professionals actually leave the profession because it has been too much. They felt like post-pandemic that the speed of transformation was so rapid that they felt like they had been dipped into a pot of boiling water, and they did jump out and leave the industry. And it has left some talent shortages. It has left payroll departments stretched. There are people now that unfortunately have either cancelled holidays or don't feel like they can take annual leave because they're so worried about that payroll process being left behind or not being delivered effectively. And we know that the profile of payroll, how important it is, because if we get that wrong, it can impact employer brand, it can impact employee attraction, retention, all those things that go with it. So it's a hugely important function, a hugely stressful function, which I think you highlighted really articulately there in the response that you gave. But there's also a bit of a challenge we've got to overcome. So we know, and certainly the temperature check and the pulse that I'm reading in the people that I speak to, they want to make the profession more strategic. Payroll managers want to come out of the manual-based tasks, which you mentioned there, which have kind of, I guess, handcuffed them to the desk to say, we've got to be timekeeping, we can't get away because this has to be led. And they really want to get strategic. And it's difficult to make that balance because they have to, at some point, as you say, put a sort of a flag in the sand and go, something needs to shift, something needs to change. We know what got us here is not going to get us there. We want to be more strategic. How do we change? And part of that often involves creating a business case, if you like, for C-suite. And we need to put a proposition forward to say, right, something needs to change. We think that a lot of the signals you've just highlighted there are in play. We think we're fully outgrowing our previous processes. What advice would you give to those individuals that need to create that business case for change to their C-suite to allow them to really get the results they're looking for?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it is hard because a lot of the costs of a payroll process are non-obvious. And leadership are often really far removed from the risks, the inefficiencies, the time burden on other people. And I have seen genuinely businesses be unable to offer the benefits that they want to offer because it would impose too much of a payroll burden. And I think the thing about kind of going to C-suite is you've got to give some kind of return on investment, right? Like, the pain is very personal to whomever is running payroll, whether it's a payroll professional, whether it's a smaller business and it's a HR or finance generalist having to step into it. Like, that pain is personal and very obvious. From a leadership perspective, they might, be very far removed from that. So it's a case of, trying to highlight where the hidden costs and opportunity costs are. The time spent getting data from multiple department heads, double checking calculations, distracting other people from their work. So for example, I know a number of teams that have some quite complex journal setups, and they will often have to ping HR or ping the FP&A team and pull them out of the work that they're doing temporarily to try and resolve kind of a question. And that kind of stop start, it's bad for your car, but it's also bad for your work productivity there as well. Processes like that, but also the risks inherent in the employee population. A lot of companies are being really thoughtful about where they place their headcount, and it is a table stakes expectation for people that they get paid right, and they get paid on time. And a lot of people's lives and home lives and all the rest, really, really depend on that process being seamless. So I think if you start to have incidents that affect, the employee perception of your business as well, like that's something that's very tangible in terms of like the brand reputation and future like talent attraction risk. But also that, a lot of the time, if you add up, how long it's taking a lot of people to say, do an outsourced process between data collation, data sending, data checking, like that's also, that time is someone's salary, and that time's a lot of money that often goes towards it. And finally, the other piece is risk. When you have systems that are poorly connected, there's also simply like a big data risk. Payroll professionals handle a lot of really sensitive data, bank details, employment details about gender, parental status, sometimes insights through obviously what people get paid, but insights through what people get paid about personal life, attachments of earnings, and all of these things that kind of may come through. And another thing we see is that where systems are fragmented and there's 1,000 different emails flying around, sometimes there's a real risk of a data breach and a data leak, and that's meaningful as well. But then on the other side of that, the opportunity cost, like what's the carrot here? Those are all the sticks of like, we don't do this, these are the things that go wrong. The carrots here are that, if payroll professionals have a bit more time, they can start looking about how to maximize the massive investment that companies are making on their people, how to find potentially more tax efficient ways to deliver benefits to the company and to the employee, which often usually results in savings or quality of life improvements for both. And I think it's important to do that. And finally, to the last point I would make on this is to try and create a sense of urgency around it, particularly if there is some milestone for the business that's coming up, a strategic initiative, something where a payroll professional would be able to add a lot of value, to highlight the urgency of getting the current process into a better shape before that point in time, so that they can take part in those projects and drive those through to completion.
Yeah, fantastic. It was really interesting. There was a supplier report that was delivered this week. You may or may not have seen it, from another payroll supplier, that talked about the reasons that people may look to change. And some of the, as you say, the sticks, some of the reasons that they're unable to get that buy-in. And I thought, being a recruiter, maybe this is the world I'm based in, they'd be buying based on price. And they said, well, we can't get a new system because it's too expensive. But actually, the study said, and the report came back with, yes, price was a concern for less than 20% of reasons that people weren't changing a system was due to price. The bigger reasons were struggling to get stakeholder buy-in, so at C-suite level, so they couldn't convince them of the need for the change. And the other one, and the overriding reason actually, was down to time. And I thought that was really interesting, because it's chicken and egg, right? We had to be able to give the time to commit to making the change. And actually, if you achieve it, you'll have the time that you've mentioned there, so you can focus on those strategic tasks. But it's finding the time in what, as you mentioned earlier, a handcuff situation to the desk, to timeframes, to create it within that kind of environment, to enable it to happen. So I guess if we focus it on the C-suite element, which was, I think, the second biggest reason that payroll managers felt they were unable to make the change, they couldn't convince their C-suite. I'm very fortunate today to have you on the show, Sabrina, because you are operating at C-suite level. You're right at the top of the payroll profession. We spoke off air very briefly, and you said, Nick, I live and breathe payroll. So if you put yourself in a C-suite position that perhaps doesn't have the payroll expertise knowledge that you have, what are the kind of things you would want a payroll manager to really put into that proposal to be able to get the buy-in that they're struggling to achieve right now?
Yeah. It all comes down to, taking it out of that personal experience and putting it back into like, where's the positive impact for the business? And typically any C-suite person is going to consider that there are 3 benefits to doing anything, not just changing a payroll provider. This could be absolutely anything. You might be reducing risk. You might be reducing cost, and time is cost as well. So you might be making something more efficient, more productive, or it might literally cost less, or you're increasing revenue. Now, I don't think anyone's arguing that by changing payroll, you're suddenly going to increase the revenue of the business, but you definitely can reduce risk and you can reduce cost through efficiency savings, in terms of, that hidden cost of the time it takes everyone else in your business to feed in to these processes, as well as it may be a case that you can say, do you know what, if I had a twice as efficient process, you won't need to hire another person into this department when we double in size, because if I had that better process here, or the cost savings could be, hey, I haven't even looked at how we can optimize the tax setup for payroll, but there's this low-hanging fruit. If we switch to this kind of pension scheme, if we changed up our benefits, if I had time to go and review benefits providers to find like a better option that's out there. You really have to kind of translate it into one of those things. You're reducing cost, which includes time. You're reducing risk, and the real thing there is if you've had recent compelling events such as a breach or people being paid the wrong amount, or you're increasing revenue, which I think, to be fair, for a payroll product, like, it's quite hard to argue that you're increasing revenue, but you really want to translate it back to being one of those 3 things, if not 2 of those 3 things.
Well, I liked when you mentioned in the previous response as well, you talked about sticks and carrots. And I've talked a lot about payroll managers need to view the payroll function as a profit-making enterprise, albeit we know it's the most, they pay a lot of money out. But little changes, as you've mentioned there, that improve efficiency, reduce time, and actually that can really leverage the power of their data to work with HR, to work with finance, to identify trends or things that could have a huge impact, particularly if you're dealing with companies that have thousands of employees. The economies of scale there actually can save so much money that it can be a really significant department there that can really raise its profile if we look at those things right. And you obviously need the right software, the right kind of stuff to do that. We also know modern software can provide more than traditional, perhaps the old case software. We've got a lot of new innovative suite of solutions coming out, from pay on demand to a host of other things as well, interactive pay slips and more. With all that in mind, with all the different solution providers out there offering loads of different services, everyone is the best in class these days. How do you assess where you're at? And how do you sort of pinpoint what kind of solution that you need? If I'm a payroll manager listening to this now, what would be my kind of key step process I'd need to follow?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And I think it really depends on what does your company look like, which, really determines like what your payroll look like, what your tech stack will look like, and also, the growth of your business. If you are a 30-person business and you have been a 30-person business for 10 years and you're still going to be a 30-person business in another 10 years, you probably don't need an all singing, all dancing solution, right? Sure. If you are Uber and you have tons of 0-hour people that you are paying out, or you have 0-hour workers, people with massively variable pay, you have term time working, you have part-year workers, seasonal, if you have these kinds of complexities, you're on the top end of like how complex a payroll process can be. And equally, are you paying people weekly rather than monthly? Because spoiler alert, that's like 4 times as much payroll process that you're going to have to have. And then also kind of looking out, to the rest of your business and what the synergies might be with tech stacks there. So, do you use a HRIS or accounting software that's compatible with, a particular payroll solution? If not, is there a very easy way to bulk download, upload, files? What is your payments process? I think one of the really hidden benefits of a good process is if you can get away from having to do a 3-day backs process to having instant faster payments. Is your bank set up in a way that would allow you to do that? If you had the right kind of bank file, could you just upload a faster payments file, for example? There's a lot of benefits to be had from that, but I think it really does depend on the shape of your business. How complex is your payroll? And how much is that likely to change? Because the worst thing is to be like, okay, my payroll's simple now, and you lock in a simple process, and then you like triple in size, or you start doing a bunch of strategic initiatives that means suddenly payroll has become much more complex because you've just rolled out the most complex, flexible benefits setup you can possibly imagine. So I think, you've always got to look in terms of like how payroll would work best for your business, and where it kind of sits in the stack of complexity. And the other kind of big variable there is benefits. How complex is your benefit stack? Your pension arrangements, do you have complex, holiday buying, selling arrangements, and, a flexible benefits part, and everyone has a different mix. How are you managing that as well? I think these are the kinds of complexities to keep an eye out.
Yeah, I like that response. I'll tell you what, I was smiling when you give me the response, because, and this isn't a payroll solution, but as a recruiter, I remember about 8 to 10 years ago, I was tempted in by the bells and whistles and trinkets of a fancy new system that offered absolutely everything. And we did implement it. And it was a challenging implementation. We went with that software. We stayed with them for a couple of years before we changing. The reason we changed again, though, is it had too much. It had over-engineered the wheel. It was way too complex. Yes, it had a zillion features, but it was too much for us to manage on a day-to-day basis. We found out that actually most of the features we didn't actually need when it was in terms of practical application. And we ended up paying over the odds for something that we understand why the payment was there, because it did offer all those things, but we just didn't need it as a recruitment firm. It wasn't relevant for our business. So I like the idea that you say, keep it simple. What do you need in your business? Because a 30-employee business will need something different to a 10,000-employee business.
And also, different businesses need a different part of their tech stack to be best in class. If your payroll is really complex, you probably need like a really best in class payroll system. If you have tons of 0-hour workers, it might be most important to have a best in class T&A system.
Yeah.
If you are in tech and you have like tons of like really high flying professionals, it may be that like a HR management system that has a really good learning and development module is important. I'm generally wary of things that promise to do everything, because I think generally they rarely do everything well. But I think it's really understanding what's the key part for your business that it is really important to get right. Because, there's a saying in business, every company has to do something cheap, right? You can't like invest to the nines on absolutely every part of the business. And even kind of within, the HR and finance, G&A department, you've got to look and say, where is the best investment going to be? Sometimes it is payroll, because that is actually the part of the business that is most complex. Sometimes it isn't. Because that's the other kind of thing for like, all-in-ones, you tend to kind of get one way or the other, where they're either immensely complex and the implementations are, multi-year processes to get that done anyway, or they are designed for generally quite small, quite simple businesses. So you just need to be kind of mindful about, and if you're a small and simple business, absolutely, like go and get an all-in-one if you're like 20 people, it'll probably do everything just about, and you won't have that many complexities that need an all singing, all dancing setup. But yeah, just really kind of zeroing in on where are we different, where are we special, where are we complex, and being thoughtful about putting the investment there. And it may mean that, as part of that C-suite evaluation, you say, hey, actually, do you know what, we could live with a much simpler this thing. I don't know what that might be, but we actually think it'd be really important to invest more in that thing.
And that's why we've seen a real emergence of APIs, right? So people can really niche in on the bit they need for their business, rather, as you say, spend thousands on a huge suite of solutions that you don't necessarily need. You can plug in your API that's relevant for your business. And we've seen a huge increase in, I think it's up, a report I read last week, that APIs in the payroll industry are up 100% from 2019 to 2022. And that's massive in terms of how many people are actually starting to engage that kind of software now. I like when you mentioned as well that, often finance might have a budget to do X, Y, and Z, and HR might be the same. Sometimes payroll does feel like a bit like the Cinderella. The sisters get to go to the ball first, and it's kind of payroll at the end. Oh, now it's my turn, and we'll kind of dust off what budget we've got left to make the change. But when they finally get that budget, I get a lot of payroll managers talk, when I try to talk to, saying, well, Nick, they won't ask me what systems I know, what we know in the market, and things like that. And they'll say, well, we can't change until April because we've got to get the year end done. Now, I would sort of challenge that back in terms of my knowledge of the market, not as a systems professional, that's not what I am, but I've seen people go through implementations at every different stage and month of the year. So obviously there must be a thought out there that people think you can only do it in April. Is that the best time to change, or the worst time to change, arguably? Or, what's your view?
Yeah, I think, generally payroll professionals are busiest in April to June, to be honest. Like if I was doing this, I probably wouldn't want to do a switch over in April. I get, the attraction of, there's a nice clean end to the tax year. But, a lot of companies will run on a different financial year, and that will be on calendar year anyway. But also there's a case of just, when in the year are you going to be most busy? In June, are you going to be tied up doing P11Ds and things like that? Do you really want to switch over in April? And that means that, you're potentially, getting all of the bits and pieces together right at the start of the year. There might be better times to do it. I'm actually a big fan of the summer switchover, when it's a bit quieter, a bunch of people are out on holiday, there are fewer people kind of asking questions. Like, it tends to be like a little bit less crazy for tons of payroll changes and things like that, and just kind of get it done there. But with modern solutions, you really generally don't need to. And I think a lot of the historic desire to switch in April has been to avoid needing to put in place year-to-date numbers and to switch it over. But just about any modern payroll provider will do all the legwork for you. It's just a case of like, give us a letter so that we can speak to your prior provider. We will get and clean and prepare the data and put it together for you. And yeah, like even the concept of a parallel run, we see a lot of people now doing, pseudo historic parallel runs where, you fake a month that you've already run rather than literally running it in parallel. Yeah. And set up there. So I think, a lot of the previous hype around kind of going live in April is to do with a process that's not as that wasn't as automated or streamlined as it probably now is. And I think it's a bit of a hangover from time. But there's not a ton of benefit, to be honest. Yes, you'll get your year-end reporting from one part, maybe then two, but most providers will help you with those processes and on the heavy burden.
It's quite a nice thing to hear, because as I said, on that report I read this week, it was time was one of the biggest reasons they haven't done it. And actually you mentioned there that it probably isn't as impactful on time as you may think it is, because the provider will do, as you said, your words, a lot of the legwork for you. And I think probably understanding that time constraint and learning that is hopefully quite valuable for the people listening to this that are considering it. but I'm quite, feel like time is their biggest constraint. Maybe they're in that percentage that haven't done it for that reason. So tell us a little bit more about Pento. Obviously, you live and breathe payroll. You offer automated payroll solutions. I know that the mission statement behind Pento is very much about taking the stress out of payroll, getting rid of those manual tasks. And I know from working in this industry for the last 20 years, it's a profession where a lot of people are very stressed. They are fearful of taking holidays. They are fearful of letting anybody down, which is wonderful. It's part of the characteristic of what makes up the payroll profession what it is. Tell us a little bit about what Pento do and how you manage to help people relieve that stress.
Yeah, well, one of the big things that we aim for is to give people, confidence and peace of mind in their payroll processes, as well at the same time as, making sure that we deliver them great time savings and make it really easy to use. And Pento is a product that is used not only by payroll professional, but by HR or finance generalist with no payroll background. We try to make it as light on payroll knowledge required in order to use as humanly possible. So, it's a modern, consumer type interface, very clean, very intuitive, very easy to use. And we just try and automate as much as we can, and not just stopping at the getting kind of the payment out. We even kind of go and integrate with accounting providers to do automated journals as well. But yeah, we will sync data from the majority of the major HRIS systems, that one that can really easily be bulk uploaded. That usually take care of all of joiners, leavers, changes. We also take into account things like work patterns, shifts, so we can automatically tell, okay, this period of sick leave is eligible for SSP, rather than having all of those calculations having to be happen offline. We're also able to do things like the 52-week count back for holiday pay, and we'll have the rolled up holiday pay option available as well for when that change comes through. To be able to support that, and then we just take it through, and we hook up to a bank called Modular that companies are able to set up an account with, that allows us to do faster payments, which means if payments are going out on, let's say, 31st of December, you have until midnight, 11:59 on the 30th of December to make any changes, and even just the 3, 4, 5 extra days that gives payroll professionals really just helps payroll fit into their working life rather than their life having to fit around payroll. And then we also have, expert support. We try to have the best parts of software, the automation, the ease of use, the interface, the automatic calculations, as well as having like an amazing, really strong on payroll knowledge, support and advisory team that's there, for whenever the inevitable edge case comes up, and you have that really unusual situation that you're trying to figure out, how do we process that through payroll? And yeah, our mission is really to take the pain out of payroll. So that payroll professionals and all of the generalists who are looking after payroll, even if it's not their main job, can get on with the really value add parts of their job rather than copying data from one system to another.
Yeah, it's great. I love the way you took it full circle. We started with pain, we kind of finished with the pain piece there as well, which is really great, because we're trying to remove that pain out of the payroll process. I can certainly vouch for the talent that you hire for supporting payroll inquiries, because I know that we've supported you in locating talent for your teams as well, which is great. So it's nice to see that that's invested in as part of Pento's brand as well. I guess my last question, because something we get a lot on this show and when I get in my day-to-day job in the recruitment side, is what's happening next in the world of payroll. What's the future bringing? And it's the solution providers that tend to have their finger on the pulse of what's coming next. We've had loads of podcasts and talks and webinars about pay on demand, so we know that's coming and in people's mind's eye. But what else outside of that kind of tech change is there that we can perhaps look forward to, or we should be aware of, or what trends can we expect? I'll let you choose the time frame for what future means.
It's always difficult because payroll complexity is because it's tax, right? It's tax and it's government mandated. which doesn't always mean that it's approached from a holistic first principle thing. You know, you see it with like the recent holiday pay consultation. They'll change one small part of it, and then, you know, everyone's scrambling to figure out what does it mean for the rest of it. Things continue to get fragmented. You know, the government can change, you know, rates and things at a whim, at the drop of a hat. So it's sometimes hard to be able to take that step back and have a really holistic look when you are really locked into a very reactive cycle to whatever the latest political consensus is on how pay should be assessed and taxed. But I think there are some increasingly exciting things happening in the space. I think, you know, the rise of automation and the ability to plug systems into one another to give people back the time to, you know, do the really value add pieces of work is really key. And we see that more and more. I'm excited about some of the changes in payment infrastructure that's coming up, that's, you know, allowing us to break the stranglehold of backs on payroll, and, you know, that 3-day process, which you know, none of us love. I think like there's a lot that's been done in the payments infrastructure space, that it sounds small, but giving people back those extra couple of days is really huge. I also think that there's a lot of innovation happening in the benefits space in general, and a lot of companies trying to figure out what a holistic set of compensation looks like, you know, beyond just, you know, salary and tips. And
we're seeing that as well.
And I think, you know, that's really exciting for payroll professionals to be part of that journey, and also, you know, to branch their role out into, you know, not just pay, but pay and benefits, because there's obviously a ton of synergies there. But we're starting to see more and more companies being a lot more thoughtful about what is the mix of, you know, total compensation that we provide, and how does that reflect our business, and increasing individual personalization on that front as well.
That links payroll really closely to HR as well, doesn't it, really, on that collaboration, because we're seeing HR really focused on improving their EVPs, their employee value propositions they can offer people, because they want to attract the best staff. We know there's a war for, it's a cliche, but when you hear a cliche, you've got to listen to it, right? There's a war for top talent, and the best EVPs will attract the best talent. But that's why we got to think creatively about what that holistic, as you put it, benefits and pay proposition is. What is really going to engage our employees? What is it our employees actually want? What we think they want? And really linking that with HR to understand that actually, if we offer this kind of EVP, we're going to get the best talent, and not only can we attract it, but we can keep it as well and keep it motivated. We know a motivated workforce, and if that feels included, is also a really productive workforce. So I love it, because that's actually linking payroll to benefits and payroll to HR, and the whole chain becomes a collaborative one, which I think increases and improves the value of payroll, the profile of payroll as well.
Yeah, and I think, you know, payroll does not exist in isolation. It has to be in really close collaboration with both finance and HR. And I've seen payroll sit in both of those teams. I've seen payroll sit in neither of those teams. You know, it's really kind of how a company kind of sets it up, but however a company has set it up, payroll, HR, and finance really have to be kind of joined up at the hip in kind of how to approach these things. Because, you know, to your point, HR might say this would be the best mix, and it's really individualized, and finance will say, well, how can we afford this? And payroll, how can we make it happen? I think, you know, if there's any kind of like trio of relationships, it's really important for payroll managers to make sure they cultivate in their business. It's, you know, to be really joined up with the HR and the finance broader teams, especially on initiatives like benefits, and, you know, and increasing demands for personalization and flexibility in, you know, benefits work setups, and, you know, the rise of flexible working as well, obviously has impacts on payroll, in terms of, you know, how working patterns have really changed from what they were even in just a decade or so ago.
Absolutely.
It's a very exciting space to be in.
It is. And we both live and breathe it. So, and hopefully the people that listen to this show are of the same volition as well. Well, look, if you want to take the pain out of payroll, I will put a link to Pento's proposition in the show notes. You can find it at pento.io. We're going to open the vault. 3 short, sharp questions for you, Sabrina. Have a bit of fun at the end. One piece of advice you would give to someone working in payroll right now?
Oh, depends when this goes out. Right now it's December, so I'd be like, okay, like make sure that you communicate really, really well about what your plans are for December. There are a lot of implicit expectations people have around December payroll, and this will be true, for future years as well. And you can pay on your normal date, you can pay early, but my God, tell people well in advance what you're going to do. The one kind of big piece of advice is there are a lot of surprises people like, but being paid even 1 penny less or 1 day late are not one of them.
Yeah. Now, I'll never notice when you're a penny over, but I'll always notice when you're a penny under, right? So it's important. Yeah. Yeah, no, you're right. And I'll also, just to add to that, because of the time of year that it is, if you do get an opportunity to rest and to recover, take it, because that's where we all need that recovery. That will help reduce the strain and the pain as well. So if you had the power of foresight and could change the entire payroll industry with one action or one improvement, what would that action or improvement be?
I would massively simplify the rules around holiday pay for variable workers. Even with the proposal that has come in, there are still parts of it that are dependent on the 52-week count back, and I get what it's trying to do, but it's just an disproportionate burden on like payroll workers to track and do that calculation, and to do it in weeks, and when a lot of companies work in months. I would massively simplify that piece, just because it is a disproportionate burden in terms of the value I think it drives. And I think there are simpler ways to just get to the similar outcome.
I suspect there are other people listening to this and nodding in full agreement. We need to bring back some of the offers for simplification and have a look at a few processes, I think, that being one of them. Last but not least, if the payroll was a song or a movie, what song or movie would it be and why?
Oh, that's a great one. Oh. Do you know what? And I say this partly because I'm a fantasy fan. I'm going to say Lord of the Rings, because my God, it is a quest, and it is like, it is a journey. It is a journey, and it is long, and it is hard, and you just got to keep going.
I love that. No, it's about the journey, not the destination, right? And that's definitely when you need the lows to experience the highs. You can't have it all the same all the time. So that's a great example. Well, if people want to find out more about Pento, there is 2 brilliant links I'm going to put in the show notes. One is going to lead them to payroll.io, which is your blog, which talks all about payroll management principles. There's loads of resources you can access there. But there's also, if you want to find out more about how to switch your payroll providers, if that's something you want to do, there's a brilliant blog on the Pento website where you can really learn and discover all about how you can switch payroll providers seamlessly and easily. So do check that out if that's something you want to do if you're not quite sure how. But is there anywhere else you'd like me to direct our listeners, Sabrina, while I have you?
No. As you said, the website is pento.io. We've got a ton of content and blogs on there. But equally, if you have got gnarly payroll questions and you just want to chat it through, reach out to one of the team. We're always happy to help.
Fantastic. And of course, if you are a payroll leader listening to this show and you need support with a payroll-related vacancy in the UK, EMEA, or now in the US as well, please do get in touch with either myself or one of my wonderful team at jgarecruitment.com. I will put a link in the show notes for that as well. Just leaves me to say a huge thank you to Sabrina for joining me today on the Payroll Podcast. I hope you have a wonderful Christmas. If we don't see you before, hopefully this will go out before Christmas comes so they can get that December content. But thank you ever so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Likewise, it's been great.